So now that we have a game that's functioning, we probably should start making it feel more like a game. So for example, we could add a score, but there's a couple of steps to dealing with scoring. One is actually keeping track of the score, and the other is displaying the score. So keeping track of the score is actually a two-step thing. We need to have a place to store that information, and we need to tell it when to change. Let's go ahead and start with creating a place to store that. So I'm going to go to the project manager, and I've opened up the game settings, and I'm going to go to global variables. So global variables. We're going to add a global variable, and a global variable is a variable that is maintained between scenes. So even if you change levels or change scenes, that variable will still exist. So I'm going to call this player score, and I'm going to apply that. So now we have a global variable called player score. But as in all of the other things that we've done, in the first level, I'm going to make sure that that score starts out at 0. So I'm going to go at the beginning of level 1, I'm going to add an action. We're going to go to other actions, and we are going to go find variables. And this time we're not going to the objects part, we're going to just variables because this is a global variable. And so I'm going to choose global, and I'm going to set the value of a global variable. And there it is, player score. If you don't see the variable you created, then you're probably using a scene or object variable. So I'm going to choose player score. I'm going to set it equal to, and we're going to start it at good old 0. And you could start at another score if you wanted to, but probably a good place to start. So I'm going to say OK. Now we have it set up so the score is 0, but we need to somehow display the score on the screen. And so I'm going to go to the level. We're going to add a new object. And in this case, we're going to create a new object from scratch. And we want text. Okay. Now notice there are a couple different text options. We don't want text entry because that would be the player entering text. I'm just going to display text on the screen. And we can choose the font, so like what size will we display it at, and the color. And I'm going to go ahead and choose the color, let's do white, so that it's not obtrusive in the screen. I'll make it bold. You can choose a font from a library if you've added one. I'm just going to leave it as the default font. And I'm going to say score 0. And that's just going to be my starting value. So I'm going to apply that, and we'll drag it in. And you can see there's my score 0, and I'm going to put it right over uh, this area. Now, I'm going to use the arrow keys on my keyboard to position this a little more precisely so I'm not bound to the grid. But I could also come over here and set the X and Y using these arrows. So notice I can change that. I just want to make sure the score is nicely positioned and easy to read. But right now, if I run the game, the score will never change. So as the game is going, I'm clicking these things, but the score has not changed. So that's the next step. We need to make the score change. And to do that, we're going to go to the same place where we changed everything else when we clicked on the ball. And we're just going to add another action. So notice there's a lot of things happening when I click on the ball. And one of the things that I want to do is when I click on the ball, I want to change the player's score. So I'm going to add an action. And the same way that we did it before, we're going to go to other actions. We're going to go to variables because the player score is global. So there's the global variables. And there's the value of the global variable. There's my player score. And I'm going to decide what I want to do each time they click on it. I think in this case, I'm going to add that they are going to add, let's say, 10 points each time they click on it. And so I will say, okay. That adds points, but remember that there's nothing that's actually changed the text that goes in the game. So I want to make sure that I also update the text field. Now, I don't know if you guys noticed this or not, but when I created my text object, I didn't name it very well. And so I'm going to go rename that now so it's easier to keep track of. And I'm going to call this text score. And I'm putting text there in front just so I remember this is a text object. And I'm going to go back now that I've got it named appropriately. I'm going to go back to my events. I'm going to add an action to update the text of the score in the text score. So I'm going to click that. I'm going to change its text, so modify the text. And I'm going to set it to be equal to, and here's where it's a little tricky. I always want it to say score colon and then the score. So what I'll do is I'll set it to score colon, and then I'm going to add on to that whatever information I want to use. So let's try just grabbing the value of a variable and let's get the player score. And notice it says the text of a global variable. So hopefully what that's going to do is take that global variable and convert it to a string. But let's see what happens. So let's say okay. All right, so now if I click on it, bink, bink, oop, bink. All right, so yeah, there we go. So when I grab that global string player score is actually a number, but the way we set that up, it's actually converting it to a string. And a string is text. So string is another name for text. Text symbols, combination of characters. So it's a string of characters. So now I have it set up so that the score is increasing. And our next step will be to make it so that when it reaches a certain score, we'll go to another level.